All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the August 11th Policy Committee meeting from the Commission on Police Practices. I think pull all the stuff up together. First up is roll call. So Charmaine, I'll pass it over to you.
So we have Chair Hilpert,
I'm here.
First Vice Chair Case.
Here.
Commissioner Vaughn.
Present.
And Commissioner Dalbert Griffin.
I'm here.
We also have our Executive Assistant Alina Gonde and Internal Affairs Captain Anthony Dupree. That completes roll call.
And I believe at some point also from IA, we should have Lieutenant Schmatlock, I believe, is trying to join as well. Next up is the approval of the minutes from the April 20th, 2022 Policy Committee meeting. Are there any edits or revisions anyone would like to make?
I saw one.
Okay.
Second. It had to do with there was an item where you were talking about policy and procedure of PD, and in one item was 1.06 and it was repeated in the description, and the next one down is 6.01, and then in its body it says 1.06. See if I can find it.
Trying to scroll through real quick to find it myself.
I didn't print it out. I'm sorry, Brandon.
No, it's okay. I'm scrolling through to try to see where it was.
Sugar. Oh, that's what I get for not sitting here and doing things all at one time. It just needs to be changed to 601 is all it needs.
Okay, Alina, can you follow up on that?
We don't have a good search on these files, do we? Absence.
I don't actually see it in here, but we'll make a look and we'll make sure that the policy number is corrected. I think it might actually be the previous minutes possibly, because I know that one we did have revisions to the seatbelt policy, and we also had use of force for OC spray and things like that. So we'll go back and we'll double check and we'll try to make sure if the policy number was transposed or whatever, that we get that corrected.
All right.
Aside from that one suggested revision, if we find it, were there any other edits or revisions? And if not, can I get a motion to approve as will be amended based on Nancy's correction of the policy number?
A motion to approve.
Okay, thanks. I was gonna say I can make it too, I guess, but do we have a second? I'll go ahead and second it then. So we have a motion by Andrea and a second by myself, Brandon Hilpert. All in favor?
I gotta do
We
roll
do-
call.
I guess I have to do roll call, sorry.
Yeah.
These are my community meetings where we can do it by hands.
That's okay. Commissioner Case,
Yes.
Commissioner Vaughn,
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Commissioner Dalbert Griffin,
Yes.
and Chair Hilpert.
I'll vote yes.
Motion passes 301.
All right. So I'm scrolling back up to the agenda real quick. Next up is non-agenda public comment. And I see we have two members of the public here. If you'd like to make non-agenda public comment, please go ahead and raise your hand. And we can unmute you and allow you to speak for up to 2 minutes. And I'm not seeing any hands raised, so we will move on to unfinished business. So we have a couple items on the agenda here that we've been leaving on. So the first item, it's tabled. It's the development of third-party mediation. Essentially, we're kind of keeping that on hold until we actually can create a process and hire a mediation coordinator. So that will still stay on here, but it's gonna be tabled for a while. The review of homeless encampment sweep procedures. We were still waiting to get more information pending research. We were looking at what other agencies are doing, specifically in the County of San Diego and also throughout the state. The last item there is the protest policy. Officially, it's a procedure. San Diego Police Department is actually making some revisions to that, and we've been told that they're in the process of making those revisions now. So we've asked for a copy, at least a draft copy of where they are, but we have not yet received that. So rather than having us make suggestions based on a policy that's currently under review, we have that tabled as well. Does anyone have any questions or comments on those items before we move on to new business? Okay. And then I see that Lieutenant Schmatlock is in the attendee list if we want to move him over to a panelist. So kind of the objective of this meeting is we have made numerous recommendations to the police department, and we've gotten feedback from the department on almost all of them. Some of them, to be honest, we want to push back on. So there's a lot here, unfortunately, but this is kind of where I wanted to talk to policy. Once policy has a chance to review this and make our formal recommendation, we'll present that to the full commission. And then the commission will then either approve or deny what we're recommending rather, and then we will ask the police department to reconsider. So the first item we have up, we had made, and actually, let me share my screen because I can show you what we've done. I created a kind of a quick spreadsheet of the changes we've asked for and what the steps are and where we currently are. So the first item we're going to touch base on, it's that first item here that I kind of have highlighted. The idea is, and we got this idea from up in the Bay Area, the BART, the Rapid Transit Police. They announced, or they had shared in a statewide oversight meeting, that during their buffer of their BWCs, that not only does it capture the audio, but it also, or sorry, the video, it also captures the audio. So right now here in San Diego, our BWC policy is for 2 minutes. The buffer will capture video only, so it does not have any audio. The Axon cameras that we have today do have that feature that can be done. It's just we have to have the department turn that feature on within the existing kind of Axon. It's not even changing the contract, it's basically just turning on that feature. So they did this in the past. Previously, the buffer was 30 seconds. They were able to change that to 2 minutes. Our recommendation was to add that buffer. They basically had told us, and here is the recommendation, the response. They basically told us that it's not feasible at this time due to the high cost of purchasing additional features, storage space, and software licenses. I don't believe this is actually correct because during the city auditor's report about body cameras, the police department told the city auditor, sorry, I can't talk. They told the city auditor that they have unlimited storage with their current contract. So it's not a storage space issue. And my understanding is conversations with Axon, it's also not a high cost of purchasing additional features because those features are already enabled on the body cameras that we already have today. And also, I don't believe there's any additional software licenses needed because we're not changing or adding body cameras. We're just making a change to the existing technology and the tools that they already have. So those first pieces, I don't think any of those are correct. The second piece here is they said if it needs to be purchased in the future, it would need to go to meet and confer, which I'm fine with. But I think if that's the case, I think the department needs to do that. So they declined to implement this at this time, but they said they'll be looking at it into the future. I want to push this back because I think many of the points here that they're saying are a roadblock aren't indeed roadblocks, at least that's what they've told the city auditor. So with that kind of quick discussion, I wanted to kind of open that up to all the members of the panel. And the first hand I see up is Nancy.
So Brandon, what are you going to gain out of having audio for that 2 minutes?
Yeah, so I think typically when we review the body cameras, and as the city auditor report showed, many officers are not activating their body cameras as they're supposed to. And I think it was like 40% are not activating it correctly per policy. So this would at least allow, for us and also the department. So when internal affairs or leadership is reviewing body cameras, it would allow for that 2 minutes prior to that officer activating their camera, it would allow them to not only get the video, which we have today, but it would allow them to also have the audio. And sometimes when a situation comes up quickly, that 2 minutes of audio, I think, can be very helpful to try to understand what was said, what was done. Was an officer de-escalating a situation, or were they doing something that was escalating the situation? Was the person, say they pulled someone over for you're running a stop sign or speeding? We can kind of understand more of what happened before the officer is able to turn that on, because yes, we get to see the video, but there's a lot that can be learned by hearing what that audio is as well. And if there's truly no cost to doing this, I think this is something that the department should be doing without pushback.
Okay, well, I'm kind of ambivalent on this. I'm not sure I think we would gain very much. I'm much more concerned and interested to see them make a change that says when you're going to a call, you turn it on and you leave it on, and you don't turn it off and on and off and on and off. And I would much rather put my weight on that change than to worry about audio for the 2 minutes. I keep
Yeah.
trying to think of a case where having heard somebody say something in that 2 minutes would make much of a difference to what we saw from the rest of the documentation and video and audio and stuff that we had. That's all.
Sure. And then this page I just went over to, this is the city auditor's report, where basically they were told that there's unlimited storage and the contract was for 3 years starting in 2020. But also on here, there were several recommendations, many of them that you just pointed out.
Oh, yeah.
Pointed out rather. I think it's on this page, where it also shows how of the number of calls they had, how many officers were dispatched, and how many did not use their cameras. But also on top of that, it has some of their recommendations.
It's a great report. I loved the report.
Yeah, and many of the recommendations they made, the police department has already said they will work on implementing. So I think to your point of having your camera turned on, your camera would be turned on when you're going to any activity, not just now enforcement activities, was the recommendation. And that the department needs to create a policy that makes it very clear that essentially the camera stays on until you clear the call. Now that's not implemented yet. And since the department's already said that they will do that, I think both we and the auditor are going to follow up to make sure that those policies have been revised. So I don't know if we need to make new ones, being as the fact they've already said that they'll do it. But I agree with your point. I think it'd be helpful to have one long recording rather than 22 to 5 minute recordings.
And all I'm going to say is that if there's a meet and confer and we get the PD gets pushback on that 2 minutes of additional audio, I wouldn't want to spend a lot of time pushing for it if we could get the other.
Well, and I would agree with you to the point that if officers were turning their cameras on when they were actually radio dispatched to a call, our request wouldn't even be necessary. But that's not happening. So that's why we made our request. So, but yeah, I mean, if they agree to make that change, I mean, I would pull ours off the table because then it wouldn't be needed. But
Okay.
It's a very valid point. Andrea, yep.
Yes, thank you. So it appears that this is a contract between the city and the company, which is called Axon Enterprises. And so if this was a procurement, I wonder if the contract is published. It should be published, I would imagine. And then we could look at that contract to see if some of the items that are listed here as far as, being unable to do that are actually covered in that contract.
To be honest, I haven't bothered to go pull up the contract. I do believe since it was approved by city council, I'm pretty sure it is public out there somewhere. I'm sure they have components that have been redacted, but to be honest, like for the first piece, I mean, we kind of rely on the department to tell us the truth on what the stats of their contracts are. And I will say in the past, when we've done recommendations for body cameras, I know I've gone in and I've met with them and they've been pretty open and honest about what the cameras do, what features they pay for. But yeah, I haven't looked at the contract, but we could.
Yeah, and I'm just suggesting it because it sounded like you had concerns around the truthfulness of their reasoning.
Yeah, my concern, I think, especially was the fact that they told us one thing in their response to our recommendation, and they told the city auditor something different. It was my concern, is because the messages to each different to the CPP versus the city auditor were not both they can't be both accurate, was my point. But yeah, we can take a look at that.
Thank you.
Yep. Doug.
I would disagree with Nancy. I think that it is valuable, and I think I'm the one who put in the policy recommendation because I had a couple of cases where it would have been very valuable. And And they were not cases where they were responding to a call that was dispatched. There were cases where they had viewed something. And they initiated the call without being dispatched. And it would have been very important to have heard the conversation between the two officers as to what they had observed at that point in time. And so I think it is valuable. And if there's no cost to it, you know, then I would be in favor of moving forward. And if it's going to go to a meet and confer, and there's going to be a meet and confer on other things as well, it should not, you know, take that much to include that in the meet and confer.
Okay, I'm typing up notes as we also go into this, so I can try to make sure we bring everything forward to the commission. So I think, Andrea, I see your hand up. You want to go ahead again?
Oh, yeah, just wanted to also express, I agree with Doug in that I think this can be valuable. And while I also agree with Nancy that there may be other more pressing issues to tackle, I don't think that this invalidates this concern right here.
I'm glad to hear from Doug that he has cases where he can identify that. It would have been good to hear that 2 minutes. So that's helpful for me. Thank you.
And I was gonna say, I know when I've done case reviews, I've definitely seen cases where it would be helpful to have that, because oftentimes an officer will say, either they said something or a citizen said something, but that's not captured on the body camera. So I think that would help do that. But so I think the idea on this is the fact that we will basically push back. I will double check and confirm the contract status, but since they've already told the city auditor that unlimited storage is included, if they're already going to meet and confer to make those changes, I would say this should be added into that. So I think that will be our official recommendation to the rest of the commission. So with that, I guess we should officially do a vote of policy to make sure we all agree.
We do have internal affairs here with us. So do they have any comments?
No, I don't have any comments on it. Unless you have questions.
Yeah, and for IA, I mean, if there's anything that I say that you think is not correct, please definitely feel free to speak up and correct me. I want to make sure this is a collaborative discussion rather than just us pushing stuff forward that's going to get rejected eventually.
No, so far what you said, I think is correct.
Perfect, thanks. All right, so let's do a vote on this first one. Doug, sorry, you have your hand up. Did you have another question or?
Yeah, I don't want to prolong the discussion, but it seems to me that this was also one where we were modeling it after another agency. I think it was BART.
Yes.
And they did have some concerns there about the use of what is said during those 2 minutes. And the concern was that private conversations that were not law enforcement related between the officers would be publicly available. And I forget exactly how they worded it, but I think if we were to move forward, that we would want to have the same type of an approach to protect the privacy of the officers.
Yeah, and the other thing, when we made the recommendations, part of it is the way that the BART Police Department does it is rather than having officers get sustained findings for not turning on their body camera, if that buffer period captures that full enforcement contact, they have an agreement that the officer will basically just be verbally reminded, you need to turn your camera on when you go to an enforcement contact, but then they will not receive a sustained finding for not turning on their BWC. So the idea is you get more information that's being recorded by the body cameras. And I think for the BART union, the BART POA union, I think they were probably happy with it because their officers would most likely get fewer sustained findings for body camera violations. So it kind of really seems like it's a win-win for everybody. So I think when it does go to meet and confer, I think, and we even gave them the copy from the BART contract. So they were able to look at that directly, but if we make the recommendation, I'll include that again.
Thank you.
And Shireen, let's go for a vote real quick on that.
Okay, sure. Commissioner Case,
Yes.
Commissioner Vaughn,
Yes.
Commissioner Delbert Griffin,
Yes.
Chair Hilbert,
I'm a yes.
motion passes 4-0.
All right. The other one we had, I'll go back. What we wanted to do is this number 3 here is complaints involving PD leadership. So the reason this came up is if someone files a complaint against, a captain or higher, all the way up to the chief. Right now, there's not really a process at all. So initially, we were told there was an informal process about how that would go. So we made the recommendation that we were asking that the department make that a formal process. And unfortunately, again, that's an area where what we were verbally told apparently is not true. So in the response, they told us that the San Diego Police Department has no informal, unwritten process or undocumented procedures when determining if an investigation should be initiated for misconduct for any of its employees. Part of what they were basically saying is that the policy is written applies to every employee in the department from, the most low-level person all the way up to the chief. And that if there was a conflict of interest and the city attorney agrees with that, it's this paragraph down here, that there are other city departments that could potentially initiate and start that complaints investigation. So again, our request was the department needs to create an official process. And this answer doesn't really answer our recommendation. It basically just says we don't really have a process. We just follow our standard process. I still think it makes a sense that if someone files a complaint against a high-level San Diego Police Department employee, I think it probably makes sense that there needs to be a formal written process as to how that might be different from the standard process. So if someone files a complaint against the chief, for example, does it really make sense for internal affairs to be doing that investigation? I would argue probably not, since obviously IA reports to the chief. And that would, I think, is kind of obviously a little bit of a conflict of interest. Or, flip side, say, for example, someone files a complaint against the captain of internal affairs. It doesn't make sense for internal affairs to be doing that investigation of their boss. So we want the policy to be very clear how that will be handled and who would be doing that. And this response kind of, it doesn't really answer it. It kind of punts the question. So again, opening that up, I see Doug, you have your hand up.
I'm sorry, that was up from before.
Okay. So I think maybe what makes the most sense, if you guys have, any comments or questions, I think basically, we respond to the response and basically say this doesn't address the concern that was raised, that there needs to be a formal policy in place on how complaints against leadership at the department will be investigated. Because they basically here, they just said they will not be implementing our request at this time. And I think this is something that makes sense that they should be doing. I don't know if there's any debate on that. Yep, Andrea.
I just have a clarifying question because our last policy meeting was, a few months ago. So we said the commission recommends that procedure 110 be updated to incorporate any informal, unwritten process into procedure. Was that based on feedback we received from SDPD that if a complaint is made against a higher up official, that would be addressed in-house somehow?
Yeah, so part of the issue was when we do a recommendation, usually we try to do some research and we try to get an understanding as to what are you guys doing today? How could things be different? And what would our recommendations do that could change things? So during those conversations, we asked, how are these done today? And we were actually told that there is an informal process that's not written, but there's an informal process on how they do that.
Okay.
Well, their response tells us, well, that's not true. Like what you were first told is not accurate. And so we still feel, I believe, that there needs to be a process written on how a complaint against a member of SDP leadership would be investigated. So especially since they're saying there's not even an informal process, I think we need to just change our recommendation to say you need to write a process that would address this.
Yeah, there needs to be a formal written process and procedure.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I think we're all in agreement on that one. Yep, Nancy, go ahead.
So Brandon, when you write it up this next time, put in those conflict of interest points so that somebody reading it will understand what the problem is that we see so clearly.
Okay, sure thing.
I mean, you know it, you can write it very quickly and you'll do a good job and they'll get the picture. Thank you.
Got it. All right, Charmaine, let's do a quick vote on that one. So basically we're asking to create a formal written process for investigating leadership, and I'll include the examples of conflict of interest that I raised a little bit earlier.
Good.
Commissioner Case,
Yes,
Commissioner Vaughn,
Yes,
Commissioner Delbert Griffin,
Yes.
Chair Hilbert,
I will vote yes.
motion passes 400.
All right, the next one we had, I'm actually trying to hop between our agenda and this. Basically, the ones that they've agreed to do, that I have marked down in green. We don't need to spend enough time on this. I will say one of the recommendations we asked on the discipline memos, we said that they needed to be issued within 14 days. The department agrees, and they've actually shortened it to make it 10 days. So obviously, we don't have a problem with that. The next item we had was we wanted, there were some errors in the discipline manual, and so we wanted that to be updated and corrected. The response wasn't really what I would like to see. It basically just says we're not making any changes, but we look at it all the time. So I marked that as ongoing. And as we see anything, I think we obviously, I feel like we shouldn't have to be the ones to point it out. I feel like the department should be checking that themselves. But if we see stuff, then obviously we'll make recommendations to change that. These are ones where I have some serious concerns. So for the discipline matrix, and just for any members of the public that are watching this, the discipline manual and the matrix basically explain how an officer can be disciplined and for what, and what that discipline will be. So one of the concerns we had here was that, and the department said they need further clarification. What we're seeing, and actually, let me just pull it up real quick. Let me see if I can find it. So the discipline manual kind of goes into details on this, and this is a public document, by the way, so I'm not sharing anything that's inappropriate. It's on the police department's website. And my internet is slow. But what our concern is that once we get down to the actual matrix of what the discipline is, so it'll list out the various categories of misconduct. So from everything from missing a random drug test to being untruthful to one of the things they had was minor policy violations, which what we're seeing is a lot of things are falling into the minor policy violation category because it doesn't detail what those are. Now, to be fair to the police department, I don't think we need to explain what every single minor policy violation is. Sorry, it's way down here towards the bottom. Once I passed it. Let's try this. There we go. So this is the matrix of what the discipline is. So like, as I was saying, everything from minor things of an officer showing up late to work, or if they have uniform violations. So say, for example, you have an officer who has, a minor uniform violation. It's the first time, so it would go under this category. So when we review discipline, what we do is we make sure that the discipline was appropriate for the situation and that it also falls within matrix. So if, again, same thing, you have uniform violations, but it's your third offense, it goes up in the category. So you have a written warning for that. So one of our areas that we were concerned is this second one here, which says minor policy violation. We're starting to see a lot of discipline come back that's being marked as a written warning because they're looping it under this minor policy violation when we as a commission feel that that's a little too light for what some of these things are. So we wanted them to put in more heft to what this description is because this doesn't really, it allows too much flexibility. And in what we're seeing is it's flexibility to be very minor on discipline, which we as a commission have felt is inappropriate. So that was one of the items. And they basically said they needed more information. So I think really what we're just gonna have to do is probably explain it more. Typically when we make our recommendations, and I've shared this with the police department, we don't consider things like budget. So if we're gonna make a recommendation is gonna cost, $100,000, we are not going to not make that recommendation solely for the fact that, there's a cost involved. That's really for the department to look at and say, hey, your recommendation is a great idea, but it's gonna cost too much money, we can't do it. Which is fine, that's what they need to do. But it's also something that we don't want to necessarily micromanage every single category of discipline. But I do think it's appropriate for us to make recommendations in areas where we feel like the discipline, in this case, the discipline manual isn't clear. So that was one of our issues here, is the minor policy violation. You know, I think it's too loose, and it allows too much to slide through the cracks. So their response on that one is this one down here, that they basically have the two types of categories. Again, this doesn't really truly answer what our recommendation was, but they say they want to have more discussion with us to clarify the type of document we'd like to see created to satisfy our recommendation, that until further information is obtained, they will not be implementing. So I think what we just need to do is we need to give them examples of what we feel should not be things that are minor policy violations. I mean, maybe that's the easiest way to go about it. But I wanted to open that to you guys first before we go to any of the other items. And if not, what I'll just do is I'll mark this one as we will give examples of what we feel some misconduct that should not be minor policy violations, because I think it's probably easier to say X, Y, and Z should not be considered to be minor. I know, like, sometimes, for example, we'll get things where, you know, an officer is not recording information on like RIPA cards when they're trying to do the Racial Identity Profiling Act. They fail to do those, or they fail to file those, or they fail to do a field interview or things like that. We've seen some of those come back as minor policy violations, and I personally think something like that probably should be a little bit higher. But again, I want the department to kind of come back with what their thoughts are on that, and then we can always provide guidance. But unless anyone has objections, I think for this one, I'll just say we will give them examples of things that we feel should not be minor policy violations. And since I don't see any hands coming up or disagreement, Charmaine, let's go for a vote.
First Vice Chair Case,
Yes.
Commissioner Vaughn,
Yes.
Commissioner Dabbler Griffin,
Yes.
Chair Helpert.
I'll vote yes.
Motion passes and vote is 4-0-0.
All right. The second one, kind of the same thing here. This was excessive force. So this also came up because of cases that we reviewed. So scrolling down here to where you could see this category or line here for minor, not saying minor, but when you have an officer who has a sustained excessive force, so that doesn't mean force was used that was appropriate. It just means if an officer uses force that was excessive and it was not within policy or procedure, right now, the only category they have for excessive force is low level or non-injury to a suspect. So the concern here is when they're looking at sustained excessive force, there's no category for force that causes an injury, whether it's something like a broken arm or great bodily injury or anything like that. And our recommendation was that we had that new category, and it basically starts at the second offense. So if you cause injury, that it would be a suspension up to termination. And again, on that one, this is this chunk here. So they basically said the department will study this recommendation and get back to CPP. They would obviously have to go to meet and confer. But again, I think this is one of those things that, to me, this is an oversight in the existing policy manual. The fact that they don't have an area where if you have excessive force that causes an injury, that basically you're allowing that to essentially have something as simple as a reprimand, I think is a flaw in the current discipline manual and matrix. So I'm actually shocked that they pushed back on this, but I think this is something strongly that I believe we should push back against that, their reply to our response. And Doug, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. There's no way in the world that the chief could justify having a category for sustained force that doesn't result in serious injury and not having a category for sustained force that does result in serious injury. I mean, it's obviously an oversight. It doesn't require additional study. What the department should say is that we recognize there's an oversight. We will recommend that category be added, and we will recommend what the discipline should be, and then we'll have to go to meet and confer. But what they should be saying is, yes, it is an oversight. We will add that category. they should not be saying we need to further research it, because then they need to move forward on that. And there's no way that they could, logically justify not moving forward on that. It would be
I agree.
ludicrous. I mean, their response is ludicrous.
Well, again, I think this is why when, unfortunately, when we see cases or instances that creates a reason for one of our members of the commission to refer something to the policy committee, it's usually because we see something that we feel is wrong. And this is 100% one of those times where we saw something that we felt was wrong. And again, much like Doug just said, I honestly expected the department's response would be like, yep, we'll get it done. And so the fact they pushed back floored me, to be honest. So I don't really know if we have to debate that too much, because it just seems like it's the right thing to do. But I want to give anyone else an opportunity to speak if they choose to. Yep, Andrea?
Just wanted to point out, as I look at this, to me, it seems as easy as taking out the level of injury. You could just say sustained excessive force that, obviously that may result in low level injury or mid or high level injury, right? So that in and of it's, unless, are we looking for a higher level of reprimand or a higher level of discipline for sustained excessive force that results in? Oh,
Yes.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
thank you.
so I think if we were just to take that out, I think we would see the same problem. We would still see serious injuries that are basically just getting reprimands. And I think if you have an officer who inappropriately uses force that does cause injuries, and I'm saying, when I say injury, and we can debate this with the police department later, when I say an injury, I'm not thinking like a simple scratch or something simple like that.
About a broken arm.
But absolutely, I was gonna say, if you have like a broken arm or someone has to go to the hospital or there's great bodily injury, I definitely feel like those types of things should have a higher discipline. And I think to minimize that, I think shows a serious issue of how the department might be looking at excessive force.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just trailing after everybody.
Yeah.
So apologies for that. Yeah.
All right, so I think we're all in agreement on that one. Basically, re-recommend that to the department and give additional rationale. Charmaine, can we do a vote, please?
One second. First Vice Chair Case,
Yes,
Commissioner Vaughn,
Yes.
Commissioner Delbert Griffin,
Yes.
and Chair Hilbert.
I will also vote yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
All right, the next one, we had requested the department to implement some kind of tracking of discipline, and specifically the process of issuing discipline. And I think, unfortunately, the department misunderstood our request. So what we were asking for, and for some kind of context and background, what we were finding is that discipline is in some cases was taking way over 6 months, close to a year in some cases, for an officer to be disciplined after they had a sustained finding. And sometimes I think it was innocent, and I think you have captains move around from the various divisions, and sometimes it just kind of falls between the cracks. But what we wanted to do was have the department create a tool or some kind of a tracking system. So if, say, for example, Captain Smith goes from Central to Mid-City, and then Captain Johnson takes over, if Captain Johnson isn't aware that he has X number of disciplines he needs to review for his new division, and just nothing happens, discipline doesn't get issued. So we were seeing enough cases where discipline was either not being issued or was not being issued in a timely manner, that we had asked the department to try to create some kind of disciplinary tracking system. Now, their response, I think, misunderstands what we were asking for. So they basically said any tracking system used where an officer is specifically identified may violate that officer's POBAR rights. For the public, that's the Police Officers Bill of Rights. And would be considered red flagging. A legal review would be initiated and a response will be forwarded. For the reasons stated, we will not be implementing at this time. So we're not asking them to specifically say, Officer Smith had this violation and keep a track of that. We're just trying to say there was a sustained finding against, this officer, and make sure that that officer's command is aware of that and actually not only does the discipline, but writes the memo, and also that memo gets forwarded back to the commission, because we are required to review all discipline that's been issued. So I think part of this is maybe we just have to have a conversation with them and explain what we want. But I think the concern about red flagging, I think they're thinking of something way different than what we're asking for. We just want to make sure the department is actually properly tracking that any officer who has a sustained finding is getting that discipline issued. And unfortunately, right now, Internal Affairs, who works as our liaison with that process, has a detective that basically has to go out to every division and constantly ask, hey, you have this outstanding discipline, when are we going to get that memo? Which really, to be honest, isn't their job. They shouldn't be doing that. It should be command's job to actually do the discipline for their officers as required, and it needs to be following the discipline manual in the matrix. But that's a whole nother story. So I think on this one, what we just need to do is probably go back to them, re-recommend this, and maybe clarify it, because what we were asking for is 100% not red flagging, because yes, that would be an issue, but that's not what we're asking for. We're basically asking for the department to make sure that they're doing their discipline appropriately and timely. And Doug, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, we were simply asking them to develop an internal policy, not that they necessarily share that with us. I mean, it could be more complicated in that, and requesting that we get a verification that discipline has been implemented, but that wasn't really what our concern was. Our concern was that the department seemed to not have a good internal tracking system to make sure that discipline was being issued on a timely basis, and so this was an internal recommendation. The red flagging refers to, you know, sharing the information with other people, which would be a violation of FOBAR, or could be a violation of FOBAR depending upon how one defines that. But we weren't requesting, you know, you're right, that we weren't requesting what they responded to. We were requesting that they improve their internal processes to ensure that when discipline is issued, that it be implemented on a timely basis, and that they verify that.
Anybody else? All right, so I think on this one, it's basically kind of re-recommending, but giving them a little bit more detail and background and clarification. Again, I think this is one of those recommendations that I think the commission's making that can only make the department better and more efficient in doing their job. So I was a little surprised that we got the pushback on this that we did, but I guess we can just go for a vote to re-recommend, and I'll also explain in more detail what we're specifically asking, since I do think they were a little, I think they were thinking we wanted something much more strict and prohibitive than what we were asking for.
So just a reminder, we have to have a motion and a second.
So I guess,
I don't think we've been doing that.
no, I've been trying to restate our recommendations, but so I guess basically the motion well, and then we also have to send everything to the full commission anyway, but I guess the motion on this one would be to re-recommend that the department adopt an internal policy to ensure that discipline is being issued in a timely basis.
Second,
Okay, now we go for a vote. Commissioner Case,
Yes,
Commissioner Vaughn,
yes,
Commissioner Delbert Griffin,
Yes.
and Chair Hilbert.
I'm a yes.
So how do you want to do the previous ones?
Since I'm the one that's bringing this all back, I guess I can be the one to make the official motion for all of them. And I can go back real quick and ask for a second. So the
I'll
first
second.
one.
I'll second all of them that don't have seconds.
Okay, so I can just basically restate what they were. So the first one, the motion would be to request the addition of audio to the BDOC buffer and to include that with the meet and confer requests that were requested by the city auditor. So that'd be a motion by me, second by Doug. The second one was to create a formal written process for investigating leadership. And then I will also include the conflict of interest points as examples. So again, that can be a motion by me, second by Doug, unless anyone wants to do it. The third would be a motion to define minor policy violations and give examples of what would not be minor violations. And again, that can be a motion by me and a second by Doug. The fourth one is a motion to re-recommend that excessive force causing injury be added to the discipline matrix. And then again, we can just do a motion by me and a second by Doug. And then Charmaine, I can forward you my notes as well as I'm taking them, or once I'm done.
Okay. So you just want to do a blanket vote?
Yeah, since I think we already voted on those, we could probably just vote for all of those together again.
Talks our parliamentarian.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I was gonna say, if we, since the vote was the same for all of them, I think it's probably fairly safe, but yeah.
Okay. So first Vice Chair Case,
Yes,
Commissioner Vaughn,
Yes,
Commissioner Dapper Griffin,
Yes.
and Chair Halpert.
I'm a yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
All right, and then the last one we had here. So the Bolo Flyers, just for everyone else, the Bolos are the Be on the Lookout Flyers. What we asked is that when they put something up, that they need to put a date on there so it's clear to officers. Is that Be on the Lookout flyer fresh, like, you know, a couple days old, or is it really old? It's been up for a couple months. They've agreed to do that. The last one was sharing our CPP reports with the Shooting Review Board. So as background, we were initially told that the Shooting Review Board receives a copy of the commission's report on all officer-involved shootings. We found out that that's not true, that they are not doing that. So we made a recommendation that they do that. So the response we got basically just says that this is the second to last line on that first page. Currently, the SRB, the Shooting Review Board, process does not involve having documents generated by CPP included in their review. The CPP has the responsibility of reviewing the use of force, policy, procedures, and reporting in their conclusions. The focus of the Shooting Review Board after completing its review, the board shall submit a written report commenting on the appropriateness of the tactics employed and whether or not any training needs were identified. So one of the concerns we had here is typically when we do our review of an officer-involved shooting, more often than not, we seem to identify many of the same, training or policy issues that the SRB does. And in some cases, we've actually identified some that they haven't. And so our concern is when we get these reports back that they haven't, in some cases, they didn't raise any issues that we had raised, where an officer maybe didn't follow training or procedure properly, or not procedure, but training or tactics properly. And so we feel it would be appropriate for them, if they're reviewing everything about that officer-involved shooting, it seems like it would be appropriate for them to review our document as well, as part of the evidence package that they receive about training or tactics that could have been done differently. So they were not going to implement this at the time. They said they would need a conference with city personnel and the employees' representation prior to approval. And again, I'm a little annoyed by this last sentence because they're essentially punting this. So typically what we do is we make our recommendations directly to the chief of police. But here they're basically saying that since we're independent, we should reach out to the POA to discuss this matter. I personally think that's completely inappropriate for the department to tell us to contact the police union for something when we're asking to change what their policies are, because they're basically asking the union to change the policies, which does not make sense. But want to open it up to the policy committee, and Doug, I see you have your hand up first.
Well, actually, I was in before. I probably will raise my hand in a second, but I'm not yet.
Okay, Charmaine?
So it looks like you're going over the response letter, and this
Yes.
is not on the agenda.
I thought it was.
I don't see it. Can you?
Oh, you know what? I think you're right. I skipped ahead.
Let's,
All right, well, we'll bring that up later then.
okay. Let me see.
All right, well, I'll close that one down. The next one that we had on there was actually an older one. This was the OC usage. So that is down here. Oops. So, and again, for everyone else we made a bunch of recommendations over a year ago. It was March of last year. So again, that first one, the policy, protest policy, that one, we're not making any changes for yet, just because we're waiting to see what the police department has edited of their current policy or procedure. So we're kind of keeping that on hold. The OC usage, what we had made a recommendation for is we wanted officers to be required to give a verbal warning before they used a chemical agent like pepper spray. So the department agreed to implement that, but they have not updated that policy since January 2nd of 2018. So I guess what we could do is re-recommend it, because they've said they will do it, but they haven't done it. So I don't know if what are your thoughts on that? I mean, do we just re-recommend it saying, hey, you've agreed to do this, you just haven't followed up, and we just kind of send a memo saying, hey, you agreed to do these things, but you've failed to actually update policies? Want to see what your thoughts are on that. Oh, Andrea.
Yeah, I think we should re-recommend, and we should put a timeline on it. Implement within, I don't know, or change within, however long we feel is appropriate. Unless we did that before and it was just plainly ignored. That's different.
This one, I mean, to be honest, we did give the memo, we made the recommendations because it also had, I think it was like 19 recommendations for creating a protest policy. These last 5 kind of got forgotten, to be honest. And so it took the department quite a long time to respond, to have a formal response to those recommendations. But that being said, my concern is when the department says that they're going to implement something, I would like to see them implement it in 30 days or less would be my preference. And I think in some of these, it's been a while, and I don't see any process in updating it. Typically, when the department is in the process of updating a policy or a procedure, they will mark that on their website. It'll say under review, and none of those have been updated to mark that yet. Nancy.
So the next one I see on our agenda says seatbelt usage. Department has agreed to implement, but 1.06 has not been updated. I think that should be 6.01.
You're correct.
And so it would be in the previous minutes as well as here.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was in the minutes. This might have been what you saw, but that was probably my fault when I was typing it, and I probably just transposed those numbers.
Okay. No big deal.
So I think we could probably do these both together, because both of these issues are the same issue and it was at the same time we made those recommendations. For the seatbelt usage, basically we wanted to have the policy be more clear, because the way it's written right now is an officer will pretty much never get a violation for the seatbelt, for not seatbelting someone. And so we did ask them to toughen it up so it actually could be enforceable, which the department agreed to do. And again, that one has not been updated since October 7th of 2020. So I guess my proposed motion on this would be to, and this is of course assuming the full commission agrees, would be to send a memo urging the department to, I will say, immediately update those 2 procedures as agreed. So since I made the motion, I guess I'll sponsor the motion. Can we get a second?
I'll second it.
Okay.
Okay. First Vice Chair Case.
Yes.
Commissioner Vaughn,
Yes.
Commissioner Dabo Griffin,
Yes.
Chair Hilbert,
I will vote yes.
motion passes on both.
Okay. Let me move this just so I can actually see the agenda again. All right, so the other items we have on the agenda was body worn camera auditing. Actually, here, I'll just share the agenda, make it easy. All right, so we recommended, this was June of last year, that supervisory staff audit body cameras by watching videos. Right now, the way they audit it is they basically just say, Officer A had 9 enforcement contacts and he has 9 body worn camera videos account. our concern here is SDPD's response to us conflicts with what they told the city auditor. So we were initially told that they could not implement this because it would violate an MOU between the city, the police department, and the POA, the police officers union. That basically their agreement would be that they would only review watch body cameras if there was either a complaint or an allegation of wrongdoing or for some other reason. So what they told the city auditors, however, was different. And they were basically saying that officers can, or a command can review those BWCs. So I'm not sure which one's correct. So I guess what I would say on this one is, given the response they've made to the city auditor, I feel like maybe we re-recommend this to the police department with the new information that we have and what they've agreed to do with the city or the city auditor recommendations. So any thoughts or comments on that? Nancy first, then Doug.
Yes. I always thought that the procedure was for the sergeant to be reviewing, maybe not all of course, but spot checking on his officers' BWCs by watching them. I always thought that was happening.
Yeah, and I can actually pull up their official response.
Kind of surprised.
Where was it?
So
Let's see if it's in our.
we can ask Captain Dupree if here.
Sure. Yeah, I was just trying to find their official memo back to us with the response. But either Captain or Lieutenant, if you want to chime in on that.
No, I'm not well versed on the inspections of it. I thought they could too, like Nancy did, but I could be entirely wrong, unless Lieutenant Smotlop knows different.
So
It's my understanding, guys, that yeah, sergeants can do a spot check if they have time to in their day.
So what we were told, so the recommendation was supervisory command staff shall audit compliance by physically reviewing BWC videos rather than just confirming X number of videos aligns with X number of enforcement contexts during a shift. And this was a verbal report that it's also on our YouTube link, but I marked this and I did confirm this after the meeting. We were told this is unable to implement due to an MOU between SDPD, the SDPOA, and the city. Command staff cannot proactively view BWCs absent of a complaint or justified reason to view footage. But again, that response does not match up with what the department told the city auditors. So I think given the new information, I think what probably makes the most sense is we should probably just re-recommend that based on the new information that the department shared with the city auditor, is what my guess is.
Good idea.
Doug, you have your hand up?
Yeah, well, I think that there are some restrictions in the current BWC policy, so that the supervisors cannot just randomly go through BWC to look for violations of policy. But they are allowed to verify that they're using their BWC appropriately. And my suggestion basically is to do what you just suggested, Brandon, that we have a motion that agrees with the city auditor's approach or the city auditor's recommendation, and in light of the city auditor's recommendation, ask that they reconsider that. And I don't think that the city auditor's recommendation was that they have carte blanche to review to proactively look at BWCs looking for violations. What they were looking at was the ability for officers, for supervisors to do an adequate audit to make sure that the BWCs are being turned on at the appropriate time. Not just that they turned it on, but that they turned it on and turned it off at the appropriate time. And so I would suggest that we simply agree with the city auditor's recommendation and ask the department to reconsider based on that recommendation, which they've apparently agreed to implement. And it may require a meeting confer, and that's fine.
But again, and I agree with that, but I feel like just because something needs meet and confer doesn't mean it should not be implemented.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't want the department using that as an excuse, because I think frequently we hear, oh, that's gonna need meet and confer. Then let's do it. Let's start that process. Let's send it through. All right, so Doug, since you kind of redid the motion, do you want to sponsor the motion?
Sure. So I will move that that the commission asks the department to reconsider their recommendation in light of their agreement in light of the department's agreement to accept the recommendation from the city auditor regarding that issue.
I'll second.
Charmaine, can you call a vote?
Sorry, I was muted. First Vice Chair Case,
Yes.
Commissioner Vaughn,
Yes.
Commissioner Zappa Griffin,
Yes.
and Chair Halpert.
I'll vote yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
All right, so almost to the end of our agenda and just barely over on time. The last one we had here was a firearm show of force. So
What about the next one?
Oh, I skipped it. Sorry. I'm trying to get through things. So this was something that actually Robin, who used to be on this policy committee, had asked for, was so procedure 1.55, which is de-escalation. Right now, the policy does allow officers to sometimes use profane language as a de-escalation tactic. But what we're finding is rarely does swearing at citizens de-escalate a situation. So one of the things we were going to talk about was, should we request that be changed to prohibit basically swearing at people as a de-escalation tactic? Now, a little bit of background. Sometimes an officer swearing at someone can be acceptable. Like, for example, if they're saying, put your blank hands up, that can sometimes be okay. But it's not okay to say, sign the blank ticket. So the policy is kind of weird, where it's in certain instances, it's okay for an officer to use profane language, and in other areas it's not. So what we were thinking is it probably makes sense to not use profane language as the de-escalation tactic. And with that, I see Doug, you had your hand up, and Andrew, you had your hand up too, and it just went away. So Doug, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, actually, excuse me, my hand was already up. I do want to comment on this. I think we've seen recently a lot of comments by teams that there was not attempts to de-escalate, and it doesn't seem like the commission and the department are on the same page as to what constitutes a de-escalation. So without getting into a specific case, well, anyway, so I think it may be valuable to have a workshop with somebody from the PD who handles training, and the commission to have a discussion of what constitutes a de-escalation and what doesn't constitute de-escalation, because I think that there is confusion not only on the part of the commission but also on the part of officers as to what constitutes de-escalation. Because in listening to officer interviews when they're being interviewed by IA, I often hear them, not often, but I've heard them say that they were de-escalating a situation by doing X, Y, and Z, and their definition of de-escalation didn't seem to match the department's. And so I think rather than acting on this particular recommendation, it'd be helpful to have a training with the commission and the appropriate personnel from the department, so that we have a good understanding of what the department considers to be a de-escalation and doesn't consider to be de-escalation. If we have specific questions, we can ask them then, and maybe even push back then.
All right, taking a lot of notes of that. Makes sense. Nancy.
I like Doug's suggestion, but that wasn't what I wanted to talk about. The original intent for this allowing officers to use profanity was, as we heard about it years ago, was in a group or a crowd situation, that if an officer wanted to get control of a crowd and get their attention, that it was okay for him to use some form of profanity just because the crowd would kind of maybe pay attention. That was the theory of it. So they weren't talking about de-escalation in those days. That's just what they told us about when it was okay for an officer to use that kind of language in a crowd. Thank you.
Andrea.
Yeah, and I agree with what Doug is saying, and that I think if I look at this from a clinical point of view, swearing at somebody is not de-escalation. But if I think about de-escalation from a law enforcement point of view, if you're trying to contain a situation where somebody or a group of people are, seemingly acting in ways that might present a threat, I could see how law enforcement may view that as a de-escalation tactic. I think you cannot ask officers to not ever swear. They might come into situations where it sort of constitutes a, level of sort of normal human reaction to do that in response to the stressful situation they may be faced with. I just think that it's misplaced in this specific policy.
Okay. So I think what we have here is it's not really making a policy recommendation at this point, but it's we'll reach out to the PD to see if we can set up a training and really more of a collaborative dialogue, I think, between the commission and probably someone in the training department. And then they can kind of explain what they think, where their thoughts are on de-escalation. And I agree with Doug. I think we have seen officers in their interviews say that by doing certain actions, they believed they were de-escalating when clearly they're not. So I think that might be helpful for us to understand from their side, and hopefully from them to kind of understand what our perspectives are from what we've seen. So I'll work on trying to get something set up for one of our training sessions, or maybe if we do a workshop, we can try to do that too. Almost the last item is the firearm show of force. So what we had made a recommendation for, or we were like working on getting a recommendation on, was that if officers were to pull their weapon out of their holster, it's called low ready, where maybe you're not pointing it at an individual, but you could be pointing like kind of at the ground towards either the individual's feet or towards the officer's feet where their gun is unholstered. We were discussing that should be considered a show of force and would need to be reported as a use of force. During our investigation on that, we did have some conversations with the department. They did share some videos, some training videos. So the department is actually in the process of including show of force as a reportable use of force. And my understanding is this is not yet implemented. I have asked around to try to get a date when they think that will be implemented and become policy. We don't have that date yet. The last I heard was they were waiting for an update to, there's a tool called Blue Team that officers use to report force, and they're waiting for an upgrade. But I also understand there was either a Senate bill or an Assembly bill that the department said they were waiting for that to be finalized before they changed their policy. So we did have a conversation with the captain of internal affairs this morning, and he also wasn't sure if there was any movement on that. So I was going to reach out to the executive assistant chief to see if there's any updates on that one. But I'm going to keep this on here until that policy is implemented, because I think that's something the commission and the community feel is important. So I think that's really more of a status update for everybody. But if anyone has questions or comments, and Doug, I see your hands up, but I think that's from last one.
Sorry, I keep forgetting to take it down. Oops.
And if there's no comments on that, I'll open it up to any future agenda items for any referrals. I know we did get one from our last closed session meeting, so that'll be carried forward to our next. But now I see two hands up. So Andrea, I see you first, and then Doug.
Yeah, I just had a question about that. What I would like to refer to the policy committee. There is a form, which I know I've filled out once in the past, but I'm not sure if I can still retrieve that form. Could you just point me to where I can find that?
We can upload it to the G Drive, Google Drive.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sorry, Doug, you can go.
Okay, I would like to have added to the next meeting's agenda, recategorization of untruthfulness to be a category 1 instead of a category 2. Untruthfulness results in termination, and that very clearly seems to be something that would qualify as a category 1 instead of a category 2, similar to I mean, it's actually more serious than a search and seizure, which we successfully had moved from a category 2 to a category 1. And so if something is serious enough that it results in automatic termination, it very clearly ought to be a category 1 instead of a category 2. And so I would make, no, I'm going to make a motion, I guess, just ask that be on the agenda for our next meeting.
Yep, making a note. All right, anybody else? All right, well, with that, we can go ahead and adjourn. It's 6:43. Thanks, everyone.